Hey everyone, Dr. Crayhay here. So we're discussing Chapter 2, which includes sources of information, evaluating, finding, and reading information. In this video, we'll talk about research versus your intuition. So you have a gut feeling that something is a certain way. Should you trust that more than you trust research? So we'll talk about three basic ideas. The first being thinking the easy way. So we tend to think in the most efficient way possible. Some people call this lazy, I'll call it efficient. So thinking the easy way, thinking what we want. So we tend to prefer things that agree with us. We search for things that agree with us. We have a preference for the agreeable. And then lastly, the intuitive thinker versus the scientific reasoner. So what do I mean when I say thinking the easy way? First of all, the good stories. So we tend to accept conclusions just because they make sense. It makes intuitive sense. It seems likely. We fall for a good story. Whether or not it's true has nothing to do with whether or not it's a good story, right? Just because it seems to make sense doesn't mean that it automatically does. Unfortunately, we tend to come to these conclusions just naturally. We also have the present bias, so we focus on positive instances more than negative ones. So here we have table 2.4 from the textbook, and so again we have two columns. In one you express frustration, the other you do nothing. We have two rows there. In one you felt better, and the other you felt worse. So here you can see 5 people that expressed frustration felt better in the top left there. 10 people that did nothing felt better, 5 people that did nothing felt worse, and 10 people who expressed frustration actually ended up feeling worse. So even though some of these other cells seem to be more influential, 10 people did nothing, but they felt better. To me, that seems more important. Unfortunately, we have a tendency to remember those that expressed frustration and felt better. So that's the present bias. Because one condition is present, the other is present. So that's what the present is there. We also have the pop-up principle. This is also called the availability heuristic. So things that come easily to mind guide our thinking. So let me just ask a question real quick. So we'll pause here and I will ask you, which do you think is more frequent? Dying in a fire or dying from a fall? Okay, so most of you probably answered that dying in a fire is more likely. And that is because, actually, let me tell you first of all, that is incorrect. You're actually more likely to die from falling. So we don't tend to think about how people that fall might be elderly and more likely, to have complications as a result of that fall. We also don't think about the influence of the media on us. So if someone dies in a fire, it's going to be on TV. It's an exciting thing to talk about. It can drive up viewers, all of that kind of stuff that the media is interested in. Someone dies from a fall. It doesn't make a good story. They're not going to publish it. It just makes people sad, right? The fire one, they can talk about how to prevent things like that, blah, 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 blah. So, because we hear on the news about people dying in fires all the time, that is what makes you think that it's more likely to happen. In reality, though, this is just the availability heuristic at work. We tend to think what we want. We cherry pick the evidence, which means we seek and accept only the evidence that supports what we already think. So take a second and think about your friends, think about your family, and their political orientations. So you probably know some Republicans, you probably know some Democrats. I can probably tell you right now which news station Republicans watch. I can tell you which news station most Democrats watch. And that is because we have a tendency to seek out information that is consistent with our own beliefs. So conservatives will tend to watch more conservative news programs, so they're probably watching Fox News. Democrats will watch, of course, more liberal news stations, maybe MSNBC, whatever other news stations are coming up today. So we tend to cherry pick the evidence. This even, I think I mentioned this in a previous lecture, this even comes down to how we Google things, how we ask questions. We tend to ask biased questions. By this I mean we ask questions that are more likely to give the desired answers. So in the case of Google, I think I was talking about investigating the role between easy availability of guns and school shootings. So the way you phrase your Google inquiry will influence what comes up. Your textbook talks about a study where they had people conducting interviews. Some of them were led to believe that the person was an extrovert. Some of them were, actually, they were told to find out if the person was an extrovert. Others were told to find out if this person is an introvert. Depending on the condition, the experimenters changed the questions. So they may have asked the introverts, for example, name a time when you wish you could have been outgoing. Or in what situations do you wish you could be more outgoing? They might ask an extrovert, what would you do if you wanted to liven things up at a party? So two very different questions there, depending on the expectations of the interviewer. Back to cherry picking the evidence, just briefly. I forgot your textbook talks about this really fascinating study where so participants take some kind of test. Regardless of what the test says, they're told either you have a high IQ or you have a low IQ. And then you're left in a waiting room to browse through different magazines. So students that were told that they had a high IQ spent more time reading articles and reading magazines that were talking about the importance of IQ tests, the validity, the usefulness, all of those kinds of things. Participants that were told that they had low IQ spent more time reading articles about how horrible the tests are, how they are bad, how they are not well made, all of those kinds of things. So just another example of cherry picking the evidence. So the last one on here, being overconfident. So being confident is not the same as being correct. So I find this a lot in my research with flashbulb memories. So people will say the day of, I absolutely remember that I was with Bob when I heard the news. A year later, with the same confidence, they will say, I absolutely remember that it was Frank. We have the objective data. We know that their accuracy over time it's simply not there. But the confidence doesn't waver. So being overconfident is, it's just comes natural to us, and unfortunately we tend to focus on that a little bit too much. So the last kind of point that I told you that we would talk about, going back up here, is the intuitive thinker versus the scientific reasoner. So just a couple of notes on this. Scientific thinking is not easy. It really does require you to question everything, evaluate the source of information, how the information was collected, how terms are explained, all of those kinds of things, and that's what we're really talking about through this course. So it's about to start getting difficult. Hang in there. Hopefully these lectures help.